G'day and welcome again to another panel discussion on the Campfire Project. And today I have with me, first of all, Karen Chaston from Brisbane. And how are you, Karen?
Good, thank you, Alan. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you back here on the panel again. And also Nathan Segal from New Mexico, or Mexico, I should say.
There is a bit of a difference.
There is a bit of a difference.
Well,
you were talking about not knowing geography and that. I'm shocking.
God, that's funny. I see I'm not the only, what was it called? Geographically challenged person. Yeah, New Mexico is in the United States, and Mexico is that big, landmass just south of the United States.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thanks for being here, Nathan, from that part of the world. How you been doing?
Everything's fine. I was just thinking about the topic, and I'm going, oh boy, I'm going to be voicing some very unpopular opinions, or depending.
Not a problem. Now, we usually have 4 people on the panels whenever possible. At the last moment, though, and as usual, all the people here have been helping other people. So it's natural that somebody might at the last moment get a call from one of their clients who desperately needs them, and that's what happened today. We were going to have Jürgen Schmeckel on the group as well, but he's had to pull out the very last minute. So today it's going to be the 3 of us. And what I'd love to do is start with, we talked about, I always put it out to the panelists to ask, what would you like to speak about? And one of the things that's been coming up, especially with the elections here in Australia, is all about how to bring consciousness back to politics. And thanks, Karen, for recommending this one, because you've been following Marianne Williamson, who is looking for the presidency as a candidate in the United States.
For 2020, yes.
Yeah. And you showed me a video which we've been having a look at, which has been really interesting. So would you like to kick us off and tell us what attracted you to that and what you found in that video?
Thank you, Alan. That video was actually shared with me from another conscious friend of mine. And I had the privilege of actually hearing Marianne Williamson speak in 2014. And at that stage, she was running for, not for presidency, but for a Senate seat. And I didn't find her as compelling, or I thought she was more about herself at that stage. But when I saw this video that was sent to me a couple of weeks ago, I really tuned into who Marianne Williamson is. She, in my opinion, has actually grown in the fact that she's now about the people and about bringing consciousness back into politics. And I think in America, like everyone looks at American politics, and I think a lot of us from the West and from other countries just don't understand how Donald Trump got in to start with. Even though I do think he has done some good for the States, sure, as a person, I certainly don't really resonate with him, especially the way he talks and treats women from the outside. But what I found about Marianne Williamson in this video was the fact that it was about bringing the world and politics back to love and back to consciousness about the fact that everything you do has I don't want to say a trigger effect, but it has a repercussion. Whatever is felt here will be felt somewhere else in the world. And isn't it time that we started to actually question our companies, especially the ones who are still living by the standard that the shareholders come first? We've talked about this many times, Alan, in the fact that it should be employees that come first, then customers, and then shareholders.
That's right.
And, excuse me, and through that happening, we have a ripple effect that goes out into everyone's family, into everyone's pocket, and to a fact that we're actually helping our planet in the long run. Because let's face it, we haven't been kind to our planet, and we haven't been kind to our people in the way that we treat them. And that's why I thought, let's have a discussion on consciousness in politics to see actually if it's possible. Is it possible on a domestic level, on an international level? And what would it actually look like? So I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Excellent. And it's not just holding our politicians accountable, it's also our own consciousness in that as well. Because I know with the American elections, I think 47% of the population didn't vote.
I know.
So with that many people who don't vote, whereas in Australia, we don't find that a normal thing, because we get fined if we don't vote. It's mandatory that everyone votes who's of voting age.
Is it like that in Mexico, Nathan?
Sorry, what's that?
Do you have to vote in Mexico?
Well, number one, I'm not a citizen here, so I
Okay,
can't.
right.
I couldn't vote. So it's kind of irrelevant. No, I'm from Canada, but
Okay.
I gave up voting in Canada years ago simply because my background with a lot of this political stuff is different than most people. And one of the things I've seen repeatedly is that the real power lies behind the throne, and that the person in charge is essentially a figurehead. A lot of my knowledge comes as a result of being persecuted severely by the Canada Revenue Agency so badly with audits and harassment that last summer I said, I have had enough and I want these pricks out of my life. Sorry to be so blunt, but the harassment was just unbelievable. Auditors lying to me, using fraud and extortion, all sorts of stuff to get their way. And last summer, like I said, I'd had enough. I wrote to a guy who used to be an auditor for the government. He wrote a book called The Tax Collector's Bible, which exposes all the fraud and corruption in the Canadian income tax system. And I wrote to him and said, I want out. And I filed for non-residency and received all the notification to do with that about in the last month. And I became a non-resident for income tax purposes because I was done with the harassment. And the corruption in my country, in Canada, is extremely severe on that level. And when I was talking to this former auditor, his name is Alan Baggett, and when I was talking to him at one point, I said, I've got a question for you, and I want a yes or no answer. And my question was, is the Canada Revenue Agency a mirror image of the IRS in the United States? And he said yes. And that told me everything I needed to know. In terms of the corruption that's going on in my country, if you were to watch a short film, it's an animated film called The American Dream. It lays out the structure of the IRS and the Federal Reserve in the United States. But if you watch that, you'll understand how the Canadian system works, because it's patterned on the same people. And so when you guys are talking about, consciousness in politics, well, in Canada, deeply unconscious. And there's so much to do with the politicians gaining from what they do to the people in terms of income tax. I mean, it's really severe. I know a guy personally, I met him several years ago, who had been the victim of a fraud based on the Canadian government. And they set him up, stole $5 million from him using income tax as fraud. He fought them for 20 years and lost because his lawyer was too scared to present the evidence. And so, this kind of stuff, that is a, what would you call it? A big case, if you will. But there have been tons and tons and tons of it going on. And I had to hire lawyers to protect me and all sorts of crap going on. But I finally said, I've had enough. I want out of here. I don't want to live here anymore. Yeah, I could have followed the system, but I chose not to.
Yeah, because I know that with in Australia, we had a whistleblower just recently who was talking about the directions that they were given and going out and looking at everybody as though they were a criminal and getting as much as they could back into the tax office. And he's now up on charges which amounted to 180 years if he's found guilty.
Prison.
So what we have, it's like in business, we have people who are focused on bringing the revenue in because that's how they get measured. And so the integrity goes out of it, the consciousness goes out of it. I think we've got that in our politics, we've got that in our education systems, we've got it across the board. So when we're talking about consciousness in politics, I think we're just talking about consciousness right across the board.
I would agree.
Our politicians are a reflection of how businesses are being run. And if we look at the advertising that's going on at the moment for our elections that are coming up this weekend, it's always, they're both pointing the fingers at the other person, as they say, one finger pointing and three fingers pointing back. So it's always saying what the other one's doing wrong, but they're not saying what they're going to be doing that's right. And if they do say so, they're not giving the reasons how they're going to do it as well.
But there's no policies. It's just,
Yeah. Well,
fear
one of
mongering.
Yeah, there's several major problems where I come from. We're known as the politest society in the world, but there are a couple of other things about that. Some of the business people that I know who understand what's going on tend to refer to fellow Canadians as sheeple, sheep and people. But the other thing that's going on is Canadians, a lot of the Canadians I know and have known, when I presented this information to them about the Tax Collector's Bible, I prefaced it by saying, when you read this, you won't be able to look at Canada the same way again. It'll permanently change your view. Guess what? They all refused to read it. None of them looked at it. And that's one of the things that bugs me about our society. It's not so much that we're sheep, it's just that we just don't stand up. We just don't do what's necessary. I mean, there was one tax war that took place a number of years ago in my province of British Columbia, and it was just, it was wild. The premier came into office and he introduced a tax which he promised he wouldn't introduce. One of the premiers, former premiers, came out of retirement to fight him and created the first tax war of its kind in Canada. And because of him, because he was really charismatic and also really bright, the government was beaten 55 to 45 in a vote, and they were forced to repeal the law. Plus, the former premier proved that the current premier had not only lied to the people, he had documents to prove it. And the guy was forced to resign in disgrace. So it's just amazing. It's like, wow. But overall, in terms of Canada, in terms of the politics in Canada, at least to do with income tax, extremely corrupt, extremely corrupt. And I just couldn't take it anymore. So, I mean, I could have stood there and fight like Irvin LaRue, or fought it like Irvin LaRue. But I thought, I don't want to waste my life on this. The courts are corrupt. The system is corrupt. There's no way in hell I'm going to win. Even with the best representation, the best lawyers, the best amount of money, I know I'm going to lose. So why bother?
So what you end up doing, by moving to one other country, then well, is that country any different? And that's the thing that I'm wondering. The consciousness level across the planet. What's the differences there? Listening to that video by Marianne Williamson, just the way she was talking and everything else, it just was so much common sense in there. And as you said, there was no aggression in it, the way she's explaining things as well. It's a completely different way of dealing with people and getting greater results. As you said, Karen, in a business, we look after our employees, who when they're looked after, they naturally look after our clients, who therefore naturally spend more money, which means that our shareholders make more money. If we focus on the shareholders, we don't get the money coming from our customers, and we've got employees that are costing us a fortune because they're not doing any work or don't want to be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they're not having money invested in them either, whether it's equipment or anything else like that. But what I really liked about what she said was that setting up the policies, when it comes to war, for example, their whole policy is to go to war. Why isn't it focusing on peace? Even from a world perspective, I think 95% of people in the world actually want peace. We don't want to be sending our sons and our daughters off to war. We don't want them to come back and they're traumatized and they can't function in a society that we have today. So just that alone, would be a huge difference. But as she said, big business make a lot of money out of wars. So, they have no incentive at all to be looking for peace. And they're the ones that are investing in the candidates that are being put forward.
Again, if you were to watch the movie The American Dream, you would learn an awful lot about this whole thing to do with the war and how that functions. But I just wanted to ask the two of you a question. Are either one of you familiar with what happened in Iceland a number of years ago?
What happened there?
Okay, it's really important because we're talking about bringing consciousness to politics. Many years ago, Iceland became overrun with the corrupt central bankers, and they essentially bankrupted the country. The citizens of Iceland rose up in protest. They forced the entire government to resign, and they put all the corrupt central bankers in prison for a combined term of approximately 70 years. And then they rebuilt the government, rewrote the constitution, and started over. This happened only in the last few years. So in terms of consciousness in politics, yes, it can work. It certainly worked in Iceland, but in order for it to work on a larger scale, I have no idea what's involved or what the catalyst would be. But
it's funny you say that, because Marianne Williamson touched on that, saying how the French Revolution, everyone stormed the Bastille and the people took over. So it was like she was actually putting that out there for maybe like, this is what will happen.
That's part of this whole thing, actually, is the thing that's been bugging me a lot about where I come from is the hypnotic trance of the people who actually believe that the government can control them. But if the people ever woke up out of their dream and realized that, hey, we're the ones who elected you guys, and we can get rid of you if we don't like what you're doing. If the people in Canada or any other country were to get organized and rise up together, they could just simply say, you guys are done. We want you out. We're getting rid of this system completely, and we're going to rebuild it. I mean, that's essentially what happened in Iceland. And if it can happen there, it can happen in other places. But
that actually happened with the royal family in the UK as well. When Princess Diana passed away and they weren't reacting the way the people wanted them to, Tony Blair actually went to the Queen and said, you need to be careful here. You will lose all your people, which means you'll lose your reign. And it really is about realising that, sure, a lot of people are in fear and they're controlled and everything like that, but eventually, as you said, Nathan, people will rise up and say enough is enough.
It's a matter of time. Like I said, I don't know what the catalyst will be. I knew I could have done something, but I didn't want to waste my life on it. It just wasn't worth it to me. And plus, there were other reasons why I left. I simply didn't like the climate. I didn't like the expense. I didn't like the coldness that I found in Canada. And I'm not referring to the temperature. I'm referring to the really rigid laws that we have to do with touching, to do with genuine feeling with between people. Couldn't stand it. For most of my life, I felt like I was walking around in a straitjacket. And then I came to Mexico and everything changed. Because Mexico, as a foreigner, I have way more freedom than I ever had in Canada.
When you first proposed the question, Karen, I was thinking consciousness in politics. When I was thinking of that, I wasn't thinking of the politicians. I was thinking of us, the people. Because
I was thinking about the policies.
Yeah, because the politicians won't change until the people say enough is enough. The way things have been doing it, we're just not tolerating it anymore. As people know, and that with the work I've been doing, I've been dealing with the government over 2 decades now, trying to get skills into the schools to help save our children. I know of other people who have got programs that pick up talk about on the devices on bullying and other things, and talks of suicide, drugs, but the education departments and the governments aren't doing anything about it because it's all too hard. Somebody's got to take responsibility, and they're not doing that. And I think our politicians, if we have a good look at them, I haven't seen a good statesman or stateswoman for many, many years. What we have are career politicians. And if they're in that role and they've got their career settled, yes, they've got to put up with a bit of flack. And yes, they start to look old very quickly from when they first get into power. But there's no incentive for them to change. And the incentive has to come from us as individuals and as a collective, as a community. As you said, French Revolution, the people had enough. A couple of people organised it. Everybody else got together. They called it a mob, but it was a consciousness. And then, a lot of people lost their heads and everything else. Well, possibly don't need to go to that extreme with our politicians, but having somebody to start things and people to go, hey, even just on my own, I talk differently to what I did before. And so I'm hoping that other people are starting to do the same thing. And when we're all talking differently and politicians finally realise that we are different to what we were before, we're not going to take the stuff that they've given us in the past and accept it, but we're going to question them. They work for us. They're our employees. We voted them in. If you ran an organisation, you had those, your staff were doing what they do, you would sack them. They're accountable. And the people
exactly how I feel about it.
Accountable. And that's when we'll see that their consciousness will change, because it needs to be driven, and it needs to be driven by us taking action, not just sitting on our tails.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of fighting back. I mean, I did fight back against what happened to me in Canada, but I also realized that I was never going to win, that everything was completely corrupt straight across the board. And I knew I would become another Irvin LaRue, and I thought, screw this. It's not worth it. No, Mexico's not perfect. No place. I mean, every place you go, there's going to be something. But one of the things that I've been brought up with is the idea of Canada being like the center of the universe. It's not. There are many nice places in the world and countries where people are treated much better. I mean, granted, Canada is really good in many other ways, but one of the things that I realized about the so-called democracy, it's democracy for some, not for all.
That's it.
And in terms of the laws and the way they're enforced, it's supposed to be common law, like you would find in England, but it's not. If you run afoul of some of these systems, you discover that we're living under Napoleonic law. So instead of innocent until proven guilty, it's the other way around. Guilty until proven innocent, you have to prove your innocence. Not a nice way to live, I can guarantee it. So, I mean, learning about all this stuff was really shocking to me, and making the decision to do what I did was extremely hard, but I couldn't see any other solution. There wasn't one, as far as I could tell.
Yes, and as an individual, and that if you're already caught up in things and you're not going to be able to make a major change because you are on your own, it's really starting the movement before we get into that state. How do we get other people involved in it as well, so that more and more people are standing up and saying, hey, I'm in the same boat. This needs to change. And it's getting that groundswell and more people involved in it. But I don't mean going out and picketing and everything else, and I don't mean violent responses. But I feel that if we all kept on, instead of accepting what we're being told, but question what we're being told and ask them to, okay, they've just said, right, they're going to give so much money away to new first home buyers here in Australia. It's one of the promises. They haven't said how they're going to do it. They've only said it's going to be a small number of only 10,000. There's only a fraction of those that are getting first home buyers, but they haven't said how they're going to fund it or anything else. But this is a large ditch comment that they've made at the time. And it doesn't matter what party you're with. It's the same policy or same process that we have going right across the whole lot. The integrity is not there. And we know that every country is going to have their own problems, just as every business has their own problems, because we know that 87% of people in the last Gallup research across the world are disengaged in their work, which means every company, majority of them, has got a problem. And they're all being run the same way. It's all about driving the staff to make more money and realising they're struggling to make the money because they're doing it the wrong way. They're not looking after their staff, and they're doing it in the reverse direction. So
the staff are struggling at home, so they're not going to come to work and work 100% in themselves.
That's it.
And that's the thing that everyone forgets. I'd like to just sort of go back and just sort of and I totally agree with everything that's been said. The fact that, don't you think that maybe the people in America have actually risen up a bit by actually voting Donald in? Sure, 49% of them didn't vote. But at the end of the day, weren't those the ones that actually got together and said, we are starving, we are not making ends meet, we actually will get together and we actually will vote him in?
Well, how many people do you think, on the other hand, might have thought, well, my voice doesn't mean anything and I can't do anything about it, and through apathy didn't go and vote? They thought, well, this is the way it's going. What does my voice say?
super, well, it's pretty much impossible to know that. I mean,
Mm.
the only way to find out would be to poll all those people, those who voted and those who didn't,
Mm.
in order to get that answer. But I mean, from my perspective, a lot of it's academic because I'm not an American, and
Yeah.
my
Well,
perception is
from ours as well.
so. We're all looking at this thing from the outside and just. I'm very careful with some of the stuff that I say on Facebook, but I mean, a large majority of the people I know on Facebook are Americans, and I can't believe how much they complain about politics. And I've unfriended people left, right, and center because I'm sick of the discussions. It's like that, basically those who hate Trump.
Mm.
But it's like, guys, you elected him.
Mm.
Deal with it.
Mm.
You know, so, you know, it's Canada with Trudeau right now, and it's like, well, you elected him. So short of some sort of revolution or some sort of system in place that will throw him out, you're stuck with them for a while. And
I think it all comes back to us, to ourselves. Nobody else outside of me. I just go, rightio, what do I need to do? What am I responsible for? What changes can I make? And it's
Absolutely.
really not so going, well, I'm just one person, I'm not going to be able to change anything. But speaking and walking the talk of what I believe, following my conscience, which means I am going to say things, and I know I'm going to put some people's noses out of joint. Well, that's just the way it's going to have to be, because I can't please everybody. There's no way of doing that, but I have to walk my talk and I have to stand up. So the consciousness, as I see it, starts with me.
Yep. It
in
always
my world.
does.
And then it goes out into the group consciousness.
That's it.
And that's the thing, is the group consciousness, I believe, is starting to want more. They're wanting our politicians to be more conscious. They want our businesses to actually start to not only look after their employees, but start to look after our planet. Like, we've depleted it. How much more can we go, and how are we going to leave the earth for our children and grandchildren and thereon? And that's why I feel, do you feel that it maybe when the baby boomers start to move on to their next adventure, not on this earth, will it be then that this will start to change in what the people want? Is that when the uproar will happen?
I think when we look at the Maslow's hierarchy in needs, for instance, and that's the way I look at the generations. Before me, it was the builders. You know, it was all about survival.
Yeah.
And we were, as a baby boomer, it was pushed to us, you have to have your security, get a job, work with them all your life, have a superannuation scheme, and then retire and everything else. So we were about ourself, our survival and everything else. I mean, Gen X were about, okay, well, now we've got our food today, we've got our food for tomorrow, but now I want to be recognised. It's this younger generation that I think that is going to leave the world, because they're becoming more conscious about what they need to do. And yes, we can whinge about the newer generations, but the older generations created them. And so from what we've done, the next generation learns from that and has theirs, and the next one comes along and learns from that. But I think as we get past that point where we're just about surviving and making sure that we get to retirement and everything else, there's a lot of the younger ones that are coming through who don't have that focus. Their focus is more on the family, more on the larger groups. So I think they will be along the way.
So you feel it's more on society, more on community?
I think it's coming back more to community. There are a lot that are all about them. When at work, they go, oh, they just want an easy ride and everything else. But what are they doing when they're out of work? They're with their friends, they're with the groups. Because one of the things that in England, for instance, when we had all the Gen X all out getting their careers, the kids in England were called latch kids. After school, they go home, they'd open the latch up, go inside, and then wait for their family to come home. So they were asking, where's the family? So their consciousness is coming more back to that. But there's also going to be, with the next generations again, will be a move towards that personal consciousness, and they'll be a little bit more individual as well. So I think a lot of it's going to be interesting as the millenniums and the next Gen X will start to come through.
I think it'd be nice to live in a society where a politician actually promised something and you actually thought, and believed it
Yeah.
and thought it was possible to actually happen, as opposed to, yeah, but when you get in, something will happen and you'll just say, well, that's why I can't go ahead with this policy now, even though you were voted in just on that policy.
So it's that oxymoron, all honest politicians up there with jumbo shrimp and military intelligence.
Exactly, which is a shame.
I don't know. I mean, from what I've been seeing in the world, like there was the whole Iceland thing and what went on over there, I was just absolutely astonished. And then, of course, what happened in my own province in British Columbia. I mean, I was really amazed at one premier who came out of retirement to fight the current premier and repeal an illegal tax essentially against the people. It was pretty wild being a part of that, and the manipulations that they pulled on the people. Like if you voted no, it meant that it was in favor of keeping the tax, so you had to vote yes in order to get rid of it. So kind of the mental crap that was going on, the manipulations of the population by the government. It's really dirty. And the current government trying to discredit the former premier who exposed them for fraud, corruption, misleading the people, and deliberately lying, all this stuff. And so the politician who, Premier Campbell at the time, Gordon Campbell, last I heard he got banished, but he wound up with some sort of plum job over in England, some sort of commissioner of God only knows what. But I think they had to boot him out of the country because he was a bit too much of an embarrassment.
Yeah, we see that a little bit with some of the politicians and some of the jobs that they've gone on to. And you go, I don't know how it ever happened.
Yeah. I'd like to, the Iceland situation, I wish that was more well known.
Well,
I just think that's a great concept for people to actually know about and learn about and maybe even embrace.
Well, I think the reason you won't find much about it is because it upsets the current order to do with the central bankers being in charge of the world. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I was asked by the Jewish community to check out an outfit called the British Israel Embassy thing in Vancouver, so-called racist organization with protocols of the Elders of Zion and all these different books. And what they were saying, the Jewish bankers rule the world, control the world, the finances, the wars, all the stuff we're talking about. At the time, I thought it was bunk. And then years ago, as a result of running into all my troubles with Revenue Canada, and then encountering this guy's book, and then looking at the video about the American Dream, I discovered that these people who I thought were racists years ago were in fact not. And what they were talking about with these corrupt bankers, as far as I could tell, and I've checked repeatedly in different places around the world, as far as I can tell, it's actually true. And so it was a hell of a nasty shock because, you know, there's some people who hate me that I come from a Jewish background. They don't even know me and they hate me. It's like, but this is like part of the really weird type of mental insanity or something that many people have. But in terms of this banker stuff, as far as I could tell, it was real and not fake. And there was a whole bunch of stuff going on. But I look at it and I have another perspective on it because everybody's looking in this direction. And I'm going, well, what about over here? You know, are we really seeing the true goods, or is this whole thing a whole bunch of misdirection? You know, if you were to talk to magicians, as a case in point, the whole thing, the whole deal of what they do, how they pull off these many different things, is by misdirection.
Yeah.
I was actually watching a magician the other day who was he was a pickpocket actually, but he was also doing what some would call magic. I saw him do the misdirection at one point. It's like, oh, so that's how it works. It was like the beginning of the end, you know, in a way, because it's like, oh, so that's how it's done. So it was really cool. But there's all this stuff going on, like way back in the Second World War, they, for example, the Brits were saying that they had better eyesight than the Germans because they ate a lot of carrots. But the truth is, their eyesight was every bit as much the same as the Germans. It wasn't any better or worse, carrots or not. It was disinformation designed to destroy the morale of the German people.
Yeah.
So back then they called it disinformation. Now it's called fake news and same crap, you know.
Well, as they say, even history and that, it was written by the winners. So
Yes.
the whole story, we don't know that as well. And
Of course we don't.
while you're watching this hand, the other hand is doing something over where you can't see it. But
Yeah.
and I think that's what we need to do is when we see the politicians or hear the politicians talking, and there's so much emphasis in one area, we've got to ask ourselves, what is that camouflaging? What is that taking us away from? What attention is being diverted?
Yeah.
And start looking at that more intently. It's one way to force the politicians to be a little bit more honest in the way they do things. You know, I've been very open lately about calling them on a number of different things. I've been sharing other people's posts and questioning, why is this the case? If they've said this, it's like with my results with the New South Wales government over about a decade, I've spoken to them. They've sent me letters saying, yes, our kids are most important. We've spent millions of dollars on them. They tell us the figure, but we don't look at third-party programs. Then 6 years later, kids continue to take their lives. The numbers falling through the cracks are increasing every year, and the numbers suiciding and everything else successfully increased. And I get another letter. It's exactly the same as the first one. The only difference is the actual figure they put down on what they spent. Or we hear politicians saying, oh, we're spending all this money. Well, really, if your partner was spending a lot of money and you weren't seeing the results, you'd be questioning the money they're spending. But we don't. We just listen to the amount they're spending and go, hey, that's great.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we need to be more conscious ourselves.
We had a situation years ago. I was a student at the time. I was in my early 20s. And we had some elections coming up in Canada. And there were a couple of debates. And I remember the debate between Brian Mulroney and John Turner. And this was the first time I'd seen Brian Mulroney on TV. I listened to him speak. And after a while, I turned to one of my roommates and I said, that guy speaks out of both sides of his mouth and his asshole all at the same time, which is, of course, about as rude as you can get. But the postscript to the whole story is, not only was I right, I was right more than I had imagined. Brian Mulroney turned out to be one of the most corrupt prime ministers in the country. And after he was out of power, a book was written about him on the take. They're like accepting bribes and doing all sorts of corrupt things in my country. So my perception of the guy was quite accurate, as it turned out. So yeah, I mean, but one of the things that I've seen, like, and it had to do with the income tax thing, but there was also other stuff. There were prime ministers who had come into power. Another one was Paul Martin, who deliberately changed the rules so he could benefit to do with his business, to do with shipping. And then after he got what he wanted, he changed the law again so nobody else could do what he did. How's that for corruption? It's true. It's documented. So it's just like, so consciousness, well, goes out the window when these people get power.
And that's, I say, this is why I feel that it comes back to us as individuals.
It does, as us keeping them accountable. And it's the education, isn't it? I can't understand why they don't spend the money on the education for our kids. You know, they're on that cradle to prison pipeline, so many of them, which is a shame.
Yeah, well, as we say, the kids, if we don't look after them at the very front end, they struggle at school. We've now got all the mental health issues and everything else. They grow up, you end up, getting advice to take a career that doesn't suit your personality. So when you do go into the field and work in that, you now got what we call a HECS debt, which is a higher education debt that we have. You go to university, pay for it. And so now you've done a training on a career that doesn't interest you. And when you do start working there, if you do it all, you then go, no, this is not for me. So you're unhappy at your work. And if you're unhappy at your work, you go home, you're unhappy with your spouse. And so you've got stuff going on there. And because there's issues between the husband and wife, that then flows onto the children. and we cycle down further and further down the gurgler. We've got to break that cycle.
There's also the issue, like, you know, which is in many countries, certainly in my country, but the fear that the people have of the government and not being willing to look at what the root cause is, which is the people. It's too easy. Like, it's like in the United States of America, I believe there are like 500 of these politicians who rule the roost. But I look at that, and it's just, to me, it's like a mass hypnosis. Same in Canada, same in many other countries, where the people actually believe that the government have the power to do all these things to them, and they can't do anything about it. But if the people were actually to wake up out of this mass hypnosis and realize, wait a second, we can do something, they would stop it. They would repeal all these laws, boot the politicians out. It's what they did in Iceland. I don't really know what the flashpoint was. Well, actually, according to my understanding, the flashpoint was when the central bankers bankrupted the country. That was the flashpoint, I think. Yeah, but Iceland...
Well, that goes back to the GFC, doesn't it? Was it at that point?
What's that?
Was it at the GFC in 2008? Global financial crisis?
I don't know. I think the I think the Iceland thing happened maybe 5 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe even less than that. I'd have to look for the information. I don't know. I'd have to.
Just in saying that, you would think that would have been the time in America for it to actually hit as well.
Yeah, but the problem
that's exactly what it was.
The problem was that the knowledge of what happened didn't get out in a general way with the world. As far as I can tell, it was censored. It's the same thing. I keep going back to Canada because that's what I know. Yeah. But I know that the systems are censored in my country. You're not allowed to find out the truth. And even if you did find out the truth, so many of the Canadian people are so cowed by the government that they would never stand up and do anything. It's another rude expression that I heard is like, X person wouldn't say shit if her mouth was full of it. It's that's how it is in Canada. It's like, if somebody knocks you down in Canada and walks over you with hobnailed boots on, instead of throwing the bugger off and beating the crap out of him, in Canada, a lot of people would go, ouch, that hurts. Ooh, could you blunt those hobnails so they don't hurt so much? You know, it's a kind of a weird attitude, but this is what I've seen repeatedly in my own country. People won't stand up. They keep tolerating more and more and more abuse.
There's got to be a breaking point, but when's that breaking point going to be? It's like, Karen, you mentioned the GFC, you know, global financial crisis. Well, the people who are around me, we knew it as good for clarity. We thought it was a wake-up call for everybody, but what are we doing now? We've just gone through another Royal Commission with our bankers, and the bankers are getting away with it again. They're blaming the, mortgage brokers. But no mortgage broker has ever approved a loan in his life or her life. Yeah. They just act like the people inside the bank who work for the bank.
Did either of you two see the movie The Big Short?
Yes.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was fairly recent that came out, but what happened in 2008 is happening again. They were talking about it in the movie. And it's just a matter of time before we wind up with a very similar thing happening again, which is going to be every bit as bad or worse from what I've heard.
Yeah. So we go through cycles and we repeat it, and we repeat it and repeat it.
Yeah.
It's like some of us go through relationship after relationship with the same sort of relationship. It's when does that clarity come in? And that's what we need to be looking at. When are we going to bring that consciousness back into what we're doing and start to question? And as I say, it still comes back to us as individuals.
It does come back to us, but the more of us individuals that get it, the more that we can actually. So I guess that's the only way it'll come into politics, is the more people who become conscious and aware and accepting and questioning, as you say, Nathan, to stop living in fear and start questioning, what am I actually afraid of?
Yeah, it's a really tough one, because that's what was going on in my life. I'd been terrorized so much by the government and by other sources in my life that were bullying me and harassing me. I couldn't take anymore, and I literally collapsed. But last summer, after a dental emergency, that's what finally forced me to face it and to really start looking at it, and to make a promise to myself that I refuse to live like this anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let this happen anymore. That's what made me file for non-residency. I mean, sure, Mexico's not perfect. No place in the world is, but it opened up opportunities to me that I didn't even know existed. And now that I'm outside of the system, I'm seeing things in a very different way. And it's like, when I learned about the major corruption in my country, what was wild about it is I didn't learn about it when I was in Canada. I learned about it when I was here in Mexico. And a lot of the information I got was from American expats who were telling me about all the system of corruption within the US, which eventually led me to the Tax Collector's Bible, which was written by that former auditor in Canada, who's received death threats and everything else for writing it. But if you pay income tax in Canada, it's probably the most important book you should read. So,
So one thing that I really liked I just think of it, when Marianne Williamson's video, when she was talking, it was not just our consciousness, like she mentioned about, yes, we've got all these people striving to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, it's a funny
But being the best version of yourself and that's it, that's just ego. That's not the best version of yourself. The best version of yourself is when you're helping other people. As you were saying, Karen, it's coming from that place of love, not from war, not from trying to control, but how do we help others? And in that, we become the best version of ourselves. So maybe when we look at the consciousness, we need to start looking at, okay, I need to be accountable for what I do and everything else, but how can I help those people around me? And that probably would have made your life completely different, Nathan, if there'd been people around you when you were going through that stuff to support you and everything else in the process.
It's true. When I was going through it, with the exception of this one auditor, I really couldn't find anybody to help me all that much because everybody was terrified of the government. All my friends wouldn't help me. They would all just, get a shocked look on their face and run like hell for the high country. Because the climate of fear there have been all sorts of reports about it. I mean, if you look, you'll see them, but they act like the Gestapo. They rate your life. They have all these things in place. Like I was told I needed to get all my money out of Canada so that they couldn't seize it in an audit or an investigation. You see, in Canada, if they want to nail you for something tax-wise, all they need to do is grab these documents off the shelf with an illegible signature on it. They go to the bank and they seize everything you own. You're instantly broke. You're instantly bankrupt. You have no defense. And the only way to stop it, if you're living in Canada, don't bank in Canada. So I literally had to move everything I had out of the country to a bank account in the United States. So even though there's a reciprocal tax agreement, the United States is very reluctant to share the records. So the likelihood of you losing your money after you move it out is very low. But it's that kind of stuff that goes on. And I found out the hard way after I got audited the first time and discovered later that the auditor had lied to me to get my records, that he committed fraud. And I was furious when I found out. And then it just kept happening. Different auditors, more fraud, extortion, on and on.
Well, we see it all the time with people taking shortcuts and everything else to get their job done because they're under pressure to do what they've got to do, and they're quite often doing the wrong thing.
Sure.
But time's getting on, so I was thinking, well, to sort of finish it off, when you look at the consciousness, what do you think that where we should be, what should we actually be doing right now to help that consciousness in politics? What would you think you should be doing, Nathan?
Well, really, if I'm stepping back and really looking at it, the number one thing is it begins with ourselves, and it has to do with developing. It has to do with waking up. But even in waking up, it's not a guarantee, as I found out, because I've been through this thing called spiritual awakening. But it's very easy to get sucked back into the drama of the world. But the bottom line is developing enough presence, if you will, or inner silence that it's possible to step out of the system if that becomes strong enough, it's going to affect other people around you. You don't necessarily have to do anything, or you may choose to do something, but if you do it, it will be coming, hopefully, from that silent place, from that still place, rather than from fear or manipulation or anger and any of that.
Mm.
And a part of it is, well, I mean, there are a whole bunch of things, but I would recommend that people, if they really want to get a sense of this, to study the works of any of the great spiritual masters, Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, Mooji, Stephen Bodian, Scott Kilby. There are a whole bunch of them out here, the real McCoy as far as teachers are concerned. And for people to develop their consciousness to the point where it will have an effect, it's this whole thing called presence. When you step out of the noise, and there are many metaphors where the movie The Matrix is a great example of that.
Yep.
But it has to do with, like, when you step out of the noise, you see how things really are and not what you've been told. It's pretty tough to maintain it once you know.
And hopefully that in a different state, we are everybody else's environment. So who we've become will impact on other people. If we're doing,
Absolutely,
if
yes.
it's going the wrong way, we're going to impact people in the wrong way. If we're doing it in the right way, we'll impact people that way. How about yourself, Karen? What do you think?
I think it's about taking it one step further as well, and start looking at, who you're buying from. People have power in what we buy and purchase, and start saying no to the companies that don't look after their employees, don't look after the earth, and all those sort of things, because they're the ones that have the politicians' ear and are forcing all this money onto them and stuff. But as we said, people have power. We have power in what we purchase. And, by actually using it that way to start with, it saves us having to, run at the Bastille, as Marianne Williamson said. We don't have to do it that way. We can talk with our money. We can talk by saying no to companies that are not doing the right thing, which eventually will get to the politicians. And I'm a great believer in politics. The person doesn't win, the other person loses.
That's it.
We vote against that person, and no one really wins. That's just the other person lost. And politicians need to start to understand that. If they did start to actually become these people, and I know it's the party, especially in Australia, it's not just that, they're just the figurehead, and it's the people behind them that are the ones who are really doing the policies. So it is a matter of, start talking with our money and start boycotting things that are not good. Our food has been manipulated, our water's been manipulated. Which isn't great. We all know it. The hormones in the chickens, but let's face it, they've manipulated everything.
It's interesting. Like for example, aspartame, they're going through some sort of rebranding process, so it comes under a different name, but it's still a lie. I remember a major fight I had with my mother years ago when I was staying with her, and she said, "Oh, get some, forgot what they call them, Chinese rolls." And I warmed them up, I bit into one and said, "Gross, I can taste the chemicals of this." My mother got furious with me, and she said, "You cannot," and blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Let me prove it." And I went to the freezer, I pulled out the box, and I started reading the ingredients. And there were 5 different ingredients on the thing that was different variations of MSG. And her jaw hit the floor. And she looked at me and she's going, "How can you possibly know this?" I said, "I read the labels, Mom. I read the labels." And then I took her on a tour of her kitchen and pointed out to her that about 70 to 80% of the food that she bought, mostly packaged stuff, was crap and full of preservatives and MSG and various different forms of MSG and all this other stuff. And she was so upset. And she's going, "But I was told this is healthy." "Well, you've been deceived, Mom."
Yeah. And that's what it is too.
The labeling, when you've actually got so many different things that each item, it comes by so many different names. It was like health insurance in Australia. Everybody had a slightly different one, so you couldn't compare any. Telephones, different plans with different carriers. They're also slightly different to each other. You cannot compare one to the other. And this is how, through that confusion, that we're controlled. We
Yeah.
need to start questioning all of those things, and also then flow that on to questioning our politicians with the decisions they're making and why they do it. We should be saying, okay, you put that policy in place. What was the finding, the thoughts behind it? Why did you do it that way? What were the results? How much money was spent, etc., in doing that? Where was the research? They tell us that we have to, if you go to the government with a new program, you have to have all the empirical proof and everything else. Well, we don't work for the government. The government works for us. We're doing it the wrong way around. We should be questioning them and asking them. So I think that's probably open to all of us, is to think more about what we're doing ourselves, how we're questioning things, and hold people accountable who are in a role where they're supposed to be doing things for us. And that's something I'd like to throw out to all the people who are watching this. When you've watched this, I'd love to get your responses back, because one of the things, the post I put up on Wednesday for the previous panel group is already having conversations going, people asking, well, what did you mean by that? And the panelists are coming in and giving more thoughts as well. So both Nathan and Karen, I'd really love you to keep an eye on this one when it goes out in the morning, and for those people, when they see it and they put their questions up, for you to respond on those and get into the conversations.
Sounds great.
It all happens through all of us being active and being involved. And that's what the panel, the Campfire Project was about. Some people have been comfortable sitting back, but now they're getting in touch with me and saying, yep, they'd love to have a chat by the fire with me. And they'd like to start sharing, because they also needed, especially a lot of the men, where they needed to know this was a safe place to actually be able to talk without being held down because somebody didn't agree with you.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I mean, some of the stuff I'm talking about now, mind you, I've been talking more and more about what happened, where I came from, but what happened just broke my back. I just was, well, actually, no, it's not entirely true. That's not true. What happened was, I said, I had enough of living in fear. I refuse to put up with this crap any longer, and I'm getting the hell out of here, because I am not going to allow you to keep treating me like this. And I'm not going to keep treating myself like this either. It has to stop.
So you took action on it, and hopefully that's what we'll all realise, that that's what we need to do, possibly not with the extreme of shifting countries.
No, well,
but for his health.
It's another way of seeing the world anyway. So there was.
It was the best thing you could have done, Nathan, for your health.
Yeah.
Well, it turned out to be the best thing, because what it came down to is that I didn't feel safe in Canada anymore. They just wouldn't stop auditing me. They wouldn't stop harassing me. They even harassed people around me who were totally innocent, and where I'd had to go to bat for some of these people so they didn't go to jail. It's just insane.
Okay. Right, yeah. Well, anyway, as I say, we've been talking for quite some time, so we'll wrap this up. I just wanted to say to everybody, for both Nathan and for Karen, thanks for being here today. And for everybody else who's listening in, ask your questions, make some comments, start getting active with this, because it's through the discussions that we understand how other people think, we understand how they're processing, and it brings us closer together when we have respectful and meaningful conversations. So the more that we can get into that, the better. So thanks to you, Karen, and thanks to you, Nathan, for being here today.
Thanks, Alan, for putting it on.
Thanks,
It's great.
Alan.
Yeah, you're welcome. And for everybody who's been listening, thanks for being here as well. And we'll see you on the next Campfire Project. Bye for now.